June 7th, 1944. 0840 hours. Hedgerow outside Tilly-sur-Seulles, Normandy. Private Thomas Garrett crouched in the Norman mud, watching a Panzer IV grinding toward his position through morning mist. The tank's engine rattled the earth beneath him, tracks chewing through the hedgerow 30 yards away. His hands shook, not from fear of the tank, but from what he was holding. The PIAT launcher looked less like a weapon than an accident involving springs and pipes. 3 feet of blackened steel tube mounted on a crude shoulder stock, the entire contraption weighing 32 pounds of awkward, unbalanced metal. A massive spring mechanism ran through its center, compressed under 90 kilograms of tension that could break bones if released improperly. The bomb, a 3-pound-shaped charge fitted to a rod, protruded from the front like a medieval lance. Garrett had fired the PIAT exactly twice in training. The first shot had knocked him flat, left his shoulder purple for a week, and made his ears ring for 3 days. The second shot had misfired, nearly crushing his foot when the spring released unexpectedly. His instructor had called it temperamental. The men in his section called it something else entirely, the self-killer. The Panzer turned, presenting its side armour. Garrett braced the weapon against his shoulder, aimed at the hull, and squeezed the trigger. The PIAT detonated with a violence that defied description. The spring released, driving the spigot forward with enough force to shatter ribs if positioned wrong. The recoil slammed Garrett backward into the hedgerow, his shoulder screaming, vision swimming. He tasted blood from biting his tongue, but through the smoke and pain, he saw something impossible, a jet of white-hot fire erupting from the Panzer's side. The shaped charge had penetrated the armor, sending molten metal through the crew compartment. Black smoke poured from the hatches. The tank's engine coughed once, then died. Garrett lay in the mud, gasping, wondering if he'd broken something important. His section commander crawled over, grinning through the dirt on his face. "Bloody hell, Tommy, you actually hit it." "Did I kill it?" "Dead as Victoria. Now reload the bastard thing before another one shows up." Garrett looked at the PIAT lying in the grass, smoke still rising from its tube, and seriously considered running away instead. The impossible problem. Britain's infantry had entered 1942 with a crisis that threatened to lose the war before America's industrial might could tip the balance. German armour had proven devastatingly effective across every theatre: North Africa, France, the Eastern Front, and British foot soldiers possessed almost nothing capable of stopping a tank. The Boy's anti-tank rifle, Britain's primary infantry anti-armour weapon since 1937, had become obsolete the moment German tanks added thicker plating. The weapon fired a half-inch bullet that might penetrate early Panzer models at close range, but merely annoyed anything newer. Worse, firing the Boy's dislocated shoulders, broke collarbones, and advertised the shooter's position with a massive muzzle flash. Infantry sections trying to stop German armour were essentially throwing rifle rounds at steel fortresses. The Americans had solved this problem with the bazooka, a simple, rocket-propelled tube that any soldier could operate. Fire the rocket, throw away the tube, walk away. The weapon worked beautifully, and American infantry could stop Tiger tanks with weapons that weighed 15 pounds and cost almost nothing. Britain wanted bazookas. Britain needed bazookas. Britain couldn't have bazookas. The problem was rockets. Producing effective rocket propellant required chemicals, production facilities, and supply chains that Britain simply didn't possess in sufficient quantities. Every rocket meant fuel that couldn't go to aircraft. Every rocket meant resources diverted from critical war production. The Ministry of Supply calculated that equipping British infantry with American-style bazookas would require building entirely new factories at exactly the moment when every existing factory was already running 3 shifts, producing aircraft, tanks, and ships. The requirement was stark. Britain needed an anti-tank weapon that used no rockets, no exotic propellants, no scarce materials, and could be manufactured using existing industrial capacity. It needed to penetrate 100 millimeters of armour, enough to kill any German tank currently in service. It needed to be portable by one soldier and fired without requiring a second man to load or spot. And it needed to work reliably in mud, rain, cold, heat, and the general chaos of infantry combat. The solution that emerged from British engineering officers was so bizarre, so mechanically improbable, that many officers assumed it was a joke. The spring-loaded madness. Major Millis Jeffress of the Ministry of Defence I had spent the war's early years designing unconventional weapons, explosives hidden in animal droppings, incendiary devices disguised as tin cans, mines that looked like harmless debris. His specialty was making weapons that worked when conventional solutions failed. When tasked with designing an infantry anti-tank weapon that required no rockets, he produced something that shouldn't have worked at all. The PIAT operated on a principle so simple it seemed medieval. A very large spring drove a metal rod forward very fast, and that rod hit the base of a bomb very hard. No propellant beyond the spring's stored energy. No combustion beyond the shaped charge's detonation. Just mechanical force, violently applied. The engineering was more sophisticated than it appeared. The spring, a massive coil of high-tension steel, was compressed to store approximately 200 joules of energy. When released, it drove a heavy spigot forward at sufficient velocity to propel the 3-pound bomb roughly 100 yards. The bomb itself was brilliant, a hollow charge warhead that upon impact focused explosive force into a jet of superheated metal capable of penetrating armor far thicker than the bomb's own size suggested possible. But the weapon's operation demanded physical strength that bordered on superhuman. Loading required placing the PIAT upright, stepping on its shoulder piece, and using both hands to haul the spring back into cocked position against 90 kilograms of resistance. Strong men struggled with this. Average soldiers found it nearly impossible. Wounded men couldn't do it at all. The manual recommended using a wall or tree for leverage, but combat rarely provided convenient loading surfaces. Firing was worse. The spring's release generated recoil that veterans compared to being kicked by a horse. The weapon's 32-pound weight was too light to absorb the shock, meaning the shooter absorbed it instead. Shoulders were bruised purple. Faces were bloodied when the weapon kicked backward into noses and cheeks. One training sergeant claimed he could identify PIAT gunners by their cauliflower shoulders, the distinctive swelling from repeated firing. The weapon jammed frequently. Springs broke. The spigot bent if the bomb wasn't seated perfectly. Moisture could prevent the firing mechanism from working at all. Dirt in the barrel meant the bomb might detonate on launch, killing the operator instantly. The PIAT demanded obsessive maintenance and absolute care in handling, 2 qualities not abundant in infantry combat. But the PIAT possessed one characteristic that outweighed every flaw. It was silent. Bazookas produced a distinctive whoosh and left smoke trails pointing directly back to the firer. Anti-tank rifles generated muzzle flash, visible for hundreds of yards. The PIAT fired with a dull thump, produced no flash, and left no smoke trail. A soldier could fire from inside a building, from a foxhole, or from behind cover, and the enemy had no immediate indication of where the shot originated. German tank commanders could scan their surroundings, see nothing, and then watch their tank explode from an attack they never detected. This stealth capability transformed British infantry tactics entirely. Sicily's proving ground. The PIAT received its first combat test during Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily, in July 1943. British airborne troops from the 1st Airborne Division dropped behind German lines carrying the new weapon, though most soldiers had fired it only once or twice in training. The general expectation among the paratroopers was that the PIAT would prove as useless as the boy's rifle it was meant to replace. Lieutenant Michael Dauncey's section landed near the Primosole Bridge and immediately encountered German armour, a Panzer III supporting an infantry counterattack. Dauncey's men had one PIAT, operated by a corporal who'd never fired the weapon in combat. The corporal braced against a stone wall, aimed at the Panzer's side armour at approximately 80 yards, and fired. The bomb struck perfectly, the shaped charge punching through the tank's armour and detonating inside the crew compartment. The Panzer stopped immediately, hatches flying open as surviving crew members evacuated a vehicle that was rapidly filling with smoke and fire. Dauncey's section stared in disbelief. The PIAT, the awkward spring-loaded contraption that everyone had mocked, had just killed a German tank with a single shot. Word spread through the British forces with the speed that only genuinely useful information achieves in combat. The PIAT worked. It actually worked. Infantry sections that had felt helpless against armour suddenly possessed a weapon that gave them fighting chance. Canadian troops defending against German counterattacks near Modica used PIATs to destroy 5 Panzer IVs in a single engagement. The tanks had been advancing in typical fashion, assuming that infantry without artillery support posed no meaningful threat. Canadian soldiers waited until the Panzers closed to 70 yards, then fired PIATs from prepared positions in stone buildings. The first 3 shots killed 3 tanks before the remaining German armour realized they were under effective anti-tank fire. The last 2 Panzers reversed frantically, one making it to safety, the other taking a PIAT bomb to the rear armour that disabled the engine. German after-action reports from Sicily noted, with considerable alarm, that British infantry appeared to possess a new anti-tank weapon of unknown type. The reports described the weapon as silent and highly effective, noting that tank crews received no warning before impacts. Intelligence officers struggled to identify the weapon. The lack of rocket signature confused analysts who expected any effective infantry anti-tank system to use rocket propulsion. By the time Sicily was secured, British doctrine had been rewritten. Every infantry platoon would include at least one PIAT, and every soldier would receive basic training in its operation. The self-killer had proven its worth. Normandy's killing fields. D-Day brought the PIAT to Normandy in overwhelming numbers. British and Canadian forces, landing on Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches, carried more than 10,000 PIATs between them. Every hedgerow, every village, every stone farmhouse became a potential PIAT ambush position. The Norman bocage, ancient hedgerows dividing small fields into natural fortifications, proved ideal PIAT country. German armour advancing through the tight confines found itself channeled into narrow lanes where British infantry could position PIATs at close range with excellent cover. A single soldier with a PIAT, hidden in a hedgerow and waiting patiently, could destroy a panzer worth tens of thousands of Reichsmarks with a weapon that cost perhaps £30 to manufacture. Sergeant William Bray of the South Lancashire Regiment destroyed 4 German tanks in 3 days outside Caen using the same PIAT. His technique was coldly methodical. Position himself in cover with good sight lines to likely tank approaches. Wait until German armour closed to 50 yards or less. Fire once, immediately relocate before German infantry could respond. Repeat. The PIAT's silence was essential. Bray could fire, kill a tank, and vanish before German forces identified his position. His fourth kill nearly killed him instead. The PIAT's spring had been fired repeatedly without proper maintenance, weakening the metal through stress and repeated compression. When Bray fired at a Panther tank, the spring partially sheared inside the weapon's housing, releasing with uneven force that sent the entire PIAT sideways into Bray's face. The bomb launched successfully, killing the Panther, but Bray was knocked unconscious with a broken nose and fractured cheekbone. His section commander found him lying in the mud, blood pouring from his face. The PIAT's broken mechanism scattered around him. "Bloody thing tried to kill him," the section commander reported. "Did kill the Jerry tank though, so I suppose it's a draw." The incident became emblematic of the PIAT's reputation: effective at killing tanks, potentially lethal to its operator, absolutely unpredictable in exactly how it might malfunction next. German tank crews developed tactics specifically to counter PIAT ambushes. They began advancing with increased caution through hedgerow country, deploying infantry screens ahead of armour to locate hidden anti-tank positions. Tank commanders kept hatches buttoned and maintained higher speeds through danger areas, reducing the time PIAT gunners had to acquire targets. Some German units began using artillery or mortar fire to suppress likely PIAT positions before armour advances, trading ammunition for tank survivability. None of these countermeasures proved fully effective. The PIAT's silence meant that even when German infantry screened advancing tanks, they often failed to spot the gunner until after he'd fired. British soldiers learned to fire from positions with multiple escape routes, taking their shot and immediately withdrawing before German forces could respond with overwhelming firepower. The psychological impact on German armour crews was significant. Interviews with captured tank commanders revealed that many feared PIATs more than they feared anti-tank guns. Artillery pieces could be spotted and targeted. The PIAT was invisible until it killed you, fired by an enemy who might be anywhere within 100 yards, and operated by ordinary infantry rather than specialized anti-tank units. Every hedgerow became suspect. Every building might contain death. Arnhem's desperate hours. Operation Market Garden in September 1944 gave the PIAT its most famous moment and most decorated user. Major Robert Henry Kane, of the 2nd Battalion, South Staffordshire Regiment, found himself commanding a composite force of paratroopers defending Arnhem against overwhelming German armour. Cut off from resupply, his men possessed limited anti-tank capability, a handful of PIATs, and almost no ammunition for anything else. Kane took personal charge of a PIAT on the battle's second day when German armour began systematically destroying British defensive positions. His first target was a self-propelled gun at 70 yards. Kane fired from a damaged building's upper window, the bomb striking the vehicle's side armour and disabling it immediately. German infantry responded with machine gun fire that shredded the building around him. Kane relocated, found another position, and waited for the next target. Over 6 days of fighting, Kane personally destroyed or disabled 6 German armoured vehicles using the same PIAT. He fired from windows, doorways, crater edges, and once from a wheelbarrow that he used as a mobile firing platform. The weapon's recoil gradually damaged him. His shoulder was a mass of bruises, his ears bled from repeated concussions, his face was burned from firing at close range where the shaped charge's backblast reached him. His men begged him to stop, to let someone else take the PIAT, to rest before the weapon killed him. Kane refused with language that military reports diplomatically described as emphatic. When his PIAT spring finally broke after sustained firing, he found another weapon from a casualty and continued engaging German armour. The battle's final day saw Kane defending a shrinking perimeter against Tiger tanks, the most heavily armoured vehicles Germany possessed. A Tiger's frontal armour was effectively immune to PIAT penetration, so Kane waited until one turned to engage a different target, exposing its thinner side plating. He fired from 15 yards, the bomb striking just below the turret ring. The Tiger didn't explode or burn, it simply stopped moving, the crew evacuating immediately after the shaped charge penetrated and killed the driver. Kane survived Arnhem, one of the few commanders who did, and received the Victoria Cross for his actions. His citation mentioned the PIAT prominently, noting that he had transformed a weapon, notorious for injuring its users, into the most effective anti-armor defense at Arnhem. Soldiers who served with him later claimed the weapon should have been renamed Kane's Killer, because he was the only man who'd mastered it completely. The Silent Hunter. German military intelligence spent considerable effort trying to understand the PIAT. Captured weapons were shipped to testing facilities where engineers examined the spring mechanism, the spigot, the shaped charge design. The reports expressed grudging admiration for the weapon's simplicity and genuine alarm at its effectiveness. One German analysis noted that the PIAT represented a fundamentally sound approach to the infantry anti-tank problem, utilizing available materials and manufacturing capacity to produce a weapon adequate for its purpose despite significant operational limitations. The report's conclusion was stark. British infantry armed with this weapon should be considered genuinely dangerous to all German armour at ranges below 100 meters. The weapon's silence makes preemptive suppression impossible. Recommend maximum caution in areas where British infantry presence is confirmed. The PIAT's shaped charge was particularly impressive to German analysts. The hollow charge principle, using explosive force to create a jet of superheated metal, was well understood theoretically, but the PIAT's implementation was remarkably efficient. The 3-pound bomb could penetrate armor that should have required a weapon twice its weight. German engineers attributed this to careful optimization of the charge geometry and explosive composition, demonstrating that British weapons design had matured considerably since the war's early disasters. Field reports from German tank commanders told a more visceral story. One Panzer Company commander wrote that engaging British infantry in hedgerow country had become an exercise in controlled paranoia. Tank crews maintained maximum alertness, knowing that any moment of inattention might end with a PIAT bomb through their armor. Some crews reported firing preemptively at likely ambush positions, wasting ammunition on hedgerows that might contain nothing, driven by fear that hesitation meant death. The psychological advantage was worth more than the weapon's actual kill statistics. British soldiers knew they could fight back against tanks. German tank crews knew that ordinary British infantry could kill them. This fundamental shift in battlefield dynamics, from helpless infantry fleeing armor to infantry hunting armor, transformed how both sides approached combat in close terrain. The last word. The PIAT served through the war's end and into the late 1940s before finally being replaced by more sophisticated anti-tank weapons. Some units in Malaya and Korea still carried PIATs as late as 1951, though primarily because newer weapons hadn't yet reached distant theaters rather than from any preference for the design. Veterans who'd used the PIAT maintained complex opinions about it decades later. They acknowledged its effectiveness while still nursing old shoulder injuries. They praised its kill capability while remembering comrades injured by the weapon itself. They respected what it had achieved while being grateful they'd never have to fire one again. One former infantryman, interviewed in 1989, summarized the weapon perfectly. The PIAT was a bastard. It hurt you every time you fired it. It weighed like carrying a small anvil, and it broke down if you looked at it wrong. But when a jerry tank came at you and you put a bomb through its side, all that misery seemed worthwhile. For about 30 seconds. Then your shoulder reminded you what you'd just done to it, and you remembered why everyone called it the self-killer. The weapon's official designation, Projector, Infantry, anti-tank, suggested clinical precision that the device never possessed, but its nickname captured an essential truth. The PIAT was dangerous to everyone near it, users included. It just happened to be slightly more dangerous to German tanks. That difference was enough to change how infantry fought, enough to save countless British lives, and enough to earn the weapon a permanent place in military history as the spring-loaded madness that actually worked. Britain had needed a way to kill German armour with no rockets, no exotic materials, and no time for proper development. What emerged was something that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Through mechanical violence, shaped charge physics, and the willingness of British soldiers to use a weapon that might kill them almost as readily as it killed the enemy. The PIAT was never elegant. It was never beloved. But it was British, practical, improvised, surprisingly effective, and absolutely unwilling to quit, despite being fundamentally unsuited for its task. Like so much of Britain's war effort, it succeeded not through superiority, but through stubborn refusal to fail, even when failure seemed entirely reasonable. The hedgerows of Normandy, the streets of Arnhem, and the hills of Sicily all witnessed the same pattern. A British soldier, a cumbersome spring-loaded weapon, and a German tank that would never move again. The PIAT made that possible. That it also injured its users, required obsessive maintenance, and terrified the men who carried it merely confirmed what everyone already knew. Nothing about defeating Nazi Germany was going to be easy, comfortable, or fair. The weapon was called the self-killer. The Germans learned to call it something else: effective.